In this video, I'm going to run through some of the changes that have been made to the wall tool in 2026. And these changes were made to remove some inconsistencies with the way walls behaved in top plan versus 3D. And they mainly benefit architects and BIM users who use multiple components and wall styles. A little context for non-architects: components are the materials that make up a wall. There's usually a structural component or a core component, for example, wood framing, and then there are finished components such as the drywall that would go on either side of the wood framing. But if you're not an architect, if you're not interested in components, if you want to use the wall in a more schematic way, these changes may make the walls seem more complex. So first, in previous versions, if you changed the fill of the wall in the attributes palette, the wall fill would update. But as you can see in 2026, this is no longer the case. And the reason is that the fill is controlled by the components. All walls must have at least one component, including unstyled walls. And in previous versions, the wall attributes would override component attributes for unstyled walls, and this is no longer the case. So to change the attributes, you have to edit the components. So if I change the fill in the component settings, you can see that the fill updates. So this is true for the fill in top plan. If we look at 3D, however, you can see that the fill is being controlled by what we set in the attributes palette. And this is because with walls, you have the ability to set attributes in 3D by object or by component. So by default, unstyled walls are set to by object. And if you change it to by component, you'll see that the fill updates to what we set in the component. So this is true for the fill. However, the pen can be controlled in the attributes palette. And this is because we've added add profile line to the OIP of the wall. So what this does is it allows the pen attribute of the wall to be overlaid over the component attribute, the component pen of the wall. And if we uncheck this, you'll now see that the pen is what it is set to in the component. So when it comes to editing the attributes of walls, the workflow I would recommend is to use classes. So you can set the component to not only be by object class, but to have its attributes by class. And so when you set the class of the wall, it will take on those class attributes, as you can see here. You can still set the pen by the attributes palette if you remove the by class settings. Another way to have the attributes controlled by the wall as opposed to the components is to use detail levels. Detail levels can be set in viewports, and if you set the viewport to low detail, you will see the wall attributes as opposed to the component attributes. You can also set detail levels in the design layers by selecting this option in the document preferences and either changing the default values for low, medium, and high, or setting the scale to something below what those settings are. I don't recommend this, however, because if you do this, then all objects will be set to low detail, and you may not want to see the low detail of other objects in your drawing. Another change that's been made is that when an object is inserted into a wall, if it is above the floor and there is wall below it, you will now see it below the insert. In previous versions, there were inserts like doors and windows would allow the option to turn wall lines back on, but now this is no longer necessary. This also means that the wall breaks in the OIP are no longer available. You had the ability to set the wall breaks for doors, windows, and other symbols and other objects that were inserted into walls. And this is no longer here because the look of the wall is dictated by the object itself and where it sits in 3D. So the attributes of the wall below the insert are controlled by this drop down here below attributes class. So if I change this class to wall below cut plane, you can see that the attributes change. So these are the changes to the walls in 2026, and some of the settings for the attributes may seem more complex than they were in previous versions, but these changes have made the wall more consistent between its 2D and 3D behaviors.